a spoiler-free review of No Time to Die. I, of course, am going to be very careful not to spoil anything, and I will not spoil anything. Just so, you know, I don't fuck up the viewing experience for you guys when it comes to seeing this film. It is out now in cinemas, and it is the newest James Bond and also the final James Bond of Daniel Craig's tenure. As you know, possibly James Bond has always been played since the 60s or 50s by numerous different actors, including Pierce Brosnan, Sean Connery, Timothy Dalton, Roger Moore, and all kinds of other people, other actors. And Daniel Craig said that this is going to be definitely his final one, and so it might be. That's what I wanted to say, because he did say that for Spectre as well. But yet he did continue. But this time it definitely feels final. But anyway, this is a movie number 25 in the James Bond series, believe it or not. And yeah, I said that this is Daniel Craig's fifth and final outing as James Bond. When it comes to who actually worked on this film, those were very interesting people. It was directed by Cary Joji Fukunaga, who already expressed his desire to direct a movie to Barbara Broccoli, the producer for the James Bond franchise, essentially, back during Spectre. But Sam Mendes decided to take it instead. So he was taken again for this one after there were some creative differences between the producers, Daniel Craig, and the previous duo of director-screenwriter, which was Danny Boyle, who was supposed to direct along with the screenplay from John Hodge. But yeah, both left the production due to creative differences. A lot because of Daniel Craig. I've learned. No, I apologize for that. I've learned from one of my friends that James Bond actors often have like an effect on the screenwriting and the directing of the franchise. And Daniel Craig, has that power as well. And he was very unhappy with the script and the direction that the director and screenwriter and the previous director and screenwriter were wanting to take. So he decided to replace them with some new people, or wanted to replace them. Barbara Broccoli brought in Cary Joji Fukunaga, who I respect very much. He's actually the director for the entire first season of True Detective, which is one of my favorite TV shows, and I believe one of the best TV shows ever made, for sure. Actually, the first season, one of the best seasons of a TV drama ever made. So that was a good choice on their part, I feel. It had, the air of the entire film was quite different because of it. And I think it improved upon the entirety of the film as well. But Daniel Craig wanted to bring in a new writer, and her name is Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who actually revised the entire script that was written by Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, who wrote the past several scripts of James Bond movies. She revised them, wrote mainly the dialogues for women, but also like many other dialogues, and overall kind of like changed the structuring of this story, and it's very in depth kind of properties like the dialogue that I must say hated. But we will get into that shortly. I want to introduce the movie to you a little bit and kind of like touch on what is important to me, what I felt was good, what I felt was bad. The cinematography along with directing was great, perfect for a James Bond movie. Cinematography was done, by the way, by Mr. Linus Sandgren, who also did cinematography for La La Land. So Yeah, but he did very well. So, how did I go into this movie? I might as well tell you the full story, or short story rather. We decided to go to this movie with two of my friends, one of which is actually King Kong Company, the top right, you see, and another one of our friends, because we always go to James Bond movies together. Like, it's a tradition that I didn't even know we had until they reminded me that that is indeed the case for the past like two Bond movies that we did, that we saw them together. So we went to the cinema together. And as you may have noticed, by the way, along the internet's discussions and debates about what's going on, there were some sneak peeks, obviously. These aren't spoilers, but we already knew from the very beginning that there will be an African American, no, I can't say that actually, African British, black woman, essentially, playing playing the part, or not playing the part, but being 007. So, black woman 007. And she was portrayed by Lashana Lynch, very good actress. But it was like a big shift, which immediately stirred controversy, because of course these things tend to stir controversy. And hi, Shadow finally reached or contacted us rather. Shadow finally came into the chat. Welcome, Shadow. I hope that you enjoy the review. So it wasn't because of that I had low expectations of the film, but I felt that both Daniel Craig's incessant interviews after the end of Spectre, where he literally said, "I would rather slice my wrists than play James Bond again." This is a literal quote from Daniel Craig. Twitch, don't ban me. He also, was always talked about like the inherent misogyny in James Bond, and even before knowing how much of an influence a main actor has on the James Bond franchise or the James Bond movie that he plays in, I already knew that this movie is going to try to inundate us with some kind of ideology, for better or for worse. But I am generally not really I don't really stand for ideologies working their way into the art that I enjoy. There is a way to do it, but the way that it's being currently done by the many TV shows and films in Hollywood is absolutely terrible. I believe that part of the absolute fucked upness that was season 8 of Game of Thrones was actually due to this inundation of extreme neoliberal propaganda. Just to clarify everything for you guys, because you like to watch me, I suppose, so you might as well know what my stance is on these issues. I'm talking, of course, about like representation of women and representation of African American, for example, characters, and essentially stomping out misogyny, having strong female leads, and all of that. All of these messages are good. All of these attempts to, or not attempts, but all of these representation, buildings on representations, especially with the very checkered history of film industry and pretty much any industry, to be honest, is just human history. It's good to see when there are more female leads, when there's more African American leads, when we are achieving more equality in that sense. The issue that I have with how this is trying to be achieved is that they are forcing it so hard in very well-known franchises and TV shows and films in general, that it just fucks up the writing and the art goes to shit. Where the point where you destroy the product that you have, you can no longer inundate me with anything, because I think that what you created here is a pile of garbage, and honestly I don't really care what kind of ideology you were trying to push on me, because I didn't enjoy the experience at all. Game of Thrones, I think the reason why it was totally, tragic in the way that it was made was not only due to these strategies, but actually mainly due to it being and feeling extremely rushed. But there were also like very forced and very visible changes in character development that were clear to portray essentially the stomping out of misogyny, for example, in particular, at the expense of writing that makes sense or character development that makes sense. For example, Arya Stark becoming this huge, leader and explorer, because a lady can do anything, despite the fact that she was literally being taught for years and seasons to become a stealth assassin, and there was never any discussion about whatever. It doesn't make sense. It's not important to go into detail. I just wanted to provide you with examples that if you just try so hard to make a female lead overpowered, just because you want to stomp out misogyny, then you're not essentially then you're not achieving anything. The same thing goes for the new Star Wars movies, where without spoiling anything, the main female lead, Rey, I think she's called. I completely forgot the Star Wars because I don't give a fuck about it anymore. Is just instantly overpowered and able to defeat Sith Lords easily, without any kind of Jedi training, which goes completely against what was happening in Star Wars before. It just, like, the building of the strength, building of the characters just gone out the window. It's just, here is a strong woman and she's strong because we tell you she's strong. That is essentially the issue that I have. What exactly do you mean with forced? And in what way does one force representation? So like the way I described it, right? So for example, you would have, if you look at Alien, for example, the movie Alien, there is a very strong female lead in that film. I forgot her name, but she is built up. This is a movie from the 1970s or 1980s or something. But the female lead there is built up as being strong by showing essentially her characteristics, something about her history, where she comes from, her kind of outlook on life, and she's like a built-up character. You cannot have a character just being overpoweringly strong in comparison to everybody else without any explanation, or with shoddy explanation. That's exactly why I don't like superhero movies. The same thing like goes for historical movies. I don't know the exact right now, but like historical movies that try to retell a history in ways that it wasn't, just in order to appease like neoliberal ideals. Like, for example, having African Americans portray certain figures in history, or as it appeared at first in this movie, moving back into this movie, as just taking like a popular character of a man that has history, true, with misogyny, James Bond, and replacing him with a female person of color, essentially, or black female, essentially, by replacing him in that way, which would feel forced, and which would feel that it doesn't make sense. Essentially, why not make a movie, or why not make a franchise centered around a strong female lead that is independent completely of this? That was kind of like my thoughts, and that is essentially what lots of people feared. And And that's what I mean when I talk about forced representation, or to force a representation. It's putting characters that are not sufficiently explained, or not fully, fleshed out in certain positions or in certain situations in scripts, without like just in order to like advance like some kind of like political or ideological agenda, without it being like making a good story, because that in itself destroys a story. So that's what I was afraid that would happen here. So I had extremely low expectations of this just being like a garbage movie that just tries to like, further a good message, but in a terrible, terrible way. That I have seen in a game done to Game of Thrones, and that I have seen done to Star Wars. I just felt that like this was another big death of a big franchise. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. It still was underwhelming, but it was not terrible. And that is, I think, the main point that I will develop this review around. I thought that this would be an absolute travesty, and James Bond as a franchise, as these historic movies would just be gone, and they would completely fuck it up, right? But no, James Bond is still around. James Bond is still around, and Lashana Lynch playing the new 007. She plays a character called Nomi, and she is essentially the new 007. Because if you have seen the last movie Spectre, and if you haven't, this is your spoiler warning, but I think it's important to say this. At the end of Spectre, James Bond decides to go into retirement. This is not the first time that he does this. He does this at the end of Quantum of Solace, and he does this like 2 more times back in like the 70s and 80s, where it's just used as a plot point of some kind. And here he is on retirement again, but as it turns out, some mission would force him back into fray. But as he is forced back into fray, it is clear that his previous position that he had at MI6, which was like a special agent 007, this 007 number was now taken by a different agent, because there are like agents, and you learn this in previous James Bond movies, there are like agents like 001, 009, 003 or whatever. And now that he sort of retires from his post, a new person takes up the 007 position, which happens to be Nomi, or Lashana, portrayed by Lashana Lynch, which makes sense completely. And for some reason there was this controversy that fucked with my head as well, that like out of nowhere James Bond is now this African American lady, or black lady. I can't say African American, I don't want to say it in like an offensive way. That's and that's essentially like James Bond from now on. It's just the adventures of this new Lashana Lynch portrayed character. But that wasn't the case at all. The addition of Lashana Lynch made sense. I felt like it was introduced in an alright way, and I didn't feel like I was being inundated with some ideologies, or that representation was being forced without the characters having like meaningful explanations behind who they were. So all of this that I was talking about from the beginning, it was fine. But I wanted to explain to you why exactly I was fearful, and why exactly many people were fearful. And I don't know if some of you in the chat potentially had that fear, had those fears as well, because I sure had. But that's essentially what the internet was discussing largely before the premiere of this movie. So I was quite calmed down in the cinema, seeing that this wasn't the case. Although saying that, the movie was still underwhelming. The dialogues written by the Daniel Craig's addition to the team, to the screenwriting team. He essentially insisted, and reportedly, and this is just a rumor, so don't take this as fact, he may have even threatened to walk out if the producers wouldn't play his game. He insisted on adding this this other screenwriter, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who is a British screenwriter and comedian that wrote like some like underachieving, failing sitcom in Britain that I don't even remember the name of. So yeah, she was for some reason favored by Daniel Craig very much, and she was chosen to fuck up the dialogues on this one. The dialogues straight from like the beginning scenes and the discussions between like characters, especially going to like more personal life, which was always like, you know, the personal conversations about personal life were always hard to do for James Bond screenwriters, because James Bond is very much like a cool guy that's like, oh, I'm James Bond, you know, blah blah blah, I want to go up to my room and stuff. That was Sean Connery, by the way, my imitation of Sean Connery. Stunning, I know. And massive action sequences, while this movie had the challenge of having James Bond as like a concerned boyfriend towards the beginning of the movie, or pretty much at the beginning of the movie, where he was, you know, talking to Lea Seydoux, who's the name of the actress portraying Bond's girlfriend that he meets in the movie Spectre. And their conversation was diabolical. I have not heard shittier dialogue in my life. Now, I was in the cinema, so I didn't want to disturb people by, you know, opening up my telephone and starting to type. So I didn't write it down, obviously. But damn, I wish I would, because that was the most unnatural, ridiculous dialogue of, you know, of so many movies that I've seen in the past. Like it really was bad. Madeline and James Bond, essentially, they're having this conversation, and James says like, "Are you all right?" And Madeline, "Yes, everything is fine." And James, "I'm your boyfriend. I should be worried, you know." And she's like, blah, blah, blah. You know, so like this level of highly unnatural, highly unrealistic, and highly botched dialogue that I'm absolutely sure that this random ass woman that Daniel Craig just insisted upon to join the team wrote. Because Robert Wade mainly, he co-wrote all the previous, I think, 10 James Bonds as well. And I have definitely have not seen dialogue of similar terribleness before. Shitty dialogue somewhat permeated throughout the movie, but obviously they weren't as noticeable or as shitty because they didn't focus on very, like, you know, hard, deep topics throughout much of the movie's action sequences. This James Bond was built very similarly to other James Bonds in its action-packed, you know, movie, or its action-packed formula, essentially. But it was quite long, I must say. It's 2 hours and 40 minutes of film, which is rather long for a James Bond movie. But it managed to pull it off. The action sequences, mainly due to the great combination of Karen Joji Fukunaga and Linus Sandgren, really succeeded in creating, you know, great spectacle that is very true to like the James Bond way of shooting things. It's not pure spectacle for spectacle's sense. There is lots of character in those shots. There's characterizations of like James Bond, as you know, as an agent to an extent. And there is an issue that I have with James Bond in this one as well, but I'll get to that later. So all of these things work quite well. There are long shots of some action sequences where it's literally following James along this, you know, place. I won't say exactly where, but the camera just like shifts. It like looks behind a corner. It goes, you know, sideways as James goes sideways, as he's shooting around and stuff. It's a quite well shot, very interesting to watch, very fun to watch. The issue with Daniel Craig's Bond is that his character, and this is not just for this movie, it's just that this movie continues with this trend, is that he is both immortal and infallible in any kind of action sequence that he does. It's incredible what this man can do. It always was with James Bond movies that there is, you know, lack of realism for sure. Very often, I mean, there's James Bond skiing down a mountain in massive speeds while shooting RPGs and shit in No Time to not No Time to Die, but Tomorrow Never Dies, I think. There is fucking there's so much. There's Inspector. There's literally like a chase scene of a plane just going down, you know. And James Bond can especially Daniel Craig's James Bond is perfect in maneuvering every single plane and helicopter and car and bike and scooter of all kinds, of all, you know, of all description. He is capable completely of shooting 50 people around him, and I feel like it's getting a little bit old, to be quite honest. And the thing was, with some previous Bonds, there was at least the charm of them like kind of improvising in some in some sequences. Sometime it wasn't clear that they would survive, or it wasn't like they were a complete like cold-hearted spy or just a robot like Daniel Craig often is in these action sequences. They are often like surprised or shocked that they're still alive. They are, you know, sort of counting their lucky stars. They have this charm about them, like, oof, I'm still alive. I don't know how, but Daniel Craig's James Bond is just powering through. Nothing can stop him or deter him. It's very much starting to be more and more of a superhero levels of combat, and it's kind of getting tiring in a sense that it's just unrealistic, extreme performance, superhuman person that, I don't know, I personally am somewhat tired of. Even in the other spoiler-free review that I've done for the movie Nobody, like there, it was, like, they also kind of like did some superhuman feats as well, the characters in that movie, but it was clear that it was taking a huge toll on them. They were they were beaten up. They did have to like actually get their injuries kind of sorted out. They were bleeding. They were actually getting punched or shot at or shot, while Daniel Craig just manages to like. And this is not a spoiler, by the way. I'm not telling you what happens in the latter half of the movie. I'm just telling you what's been happening for the past 5 movies. Okay, if you look at Spectre, Skyfall, everything in Skyfall, like, is this a spoiler? Okay, it technically might be a spoiler, so I won't say it. But he survives some questionable shit in lots of these movies. Okay, and it's just, I think, pushed far too far when it comes to these unsurvivable events or unsurvivable fights that he just takes on with absolute cold-blooded ability and completely exact measured response to absolutely every action that his enemy does. But I wanted to tell you more about the Fukunaga's directing style. Apparently my friend told me, King Kong Company told me that he's an avid gamer and he plays lots of games, and there were some scenes that we managed to like identify as Karajoji Fukunaga being a very playful character. There are scenes of like James Bond throwing back grenades and like other grenades getting thrown right back at him. It's like a combination. It's like a funny comedic action sequence that is done like exceedingly well, which I felt like was somewhat in the Boondock Saints as well. You remember, if you remember the review, for example, the cat scene, somewhat, I guess, or the other action sequences were quite funny too. It's a nice touch that improved on my enjoyment of the movie as well. So the movie is worth watching, even just for the cinematography and the directing style. But again, don't expect much because the writing is trash, is rubbish, I must say. And I said I don't have an issue with the addition of Lashana Lynch's character, Nomi, the new 007 that you can see on the screen right now. I don't, but I think part of the movie's need, and I think again this is Waller-Bridge's idea in the script, to kind of pander to its audience and virtue signal its progressive ways, is that 007 Nomi always talks down to James Bond and always kind of like mocks him in some way and insists on her being the 007 and constantly repeats it, like so much so that it almost felt like a little bit meta. But I almost felt like Daniel Craig in that scene, like, okay, yeah, I get it. You are the 007 now. It's fine. Yes, you are now 007. No longer man. It's fine. It was battered to no end with little to no, like with absolutely zero reason or zero character development, or it wasn't explained as Nomi having this character. It was just a message to the audience, I felt like, which I didn't like, which I didn't appreciate very much, I must say. The other thing, Nomi was an interesting addition, and what I kind of was disappointed with was that she wasn't. I don't think that she was explained enough, or I don't think that there was enough focus on her. I mean, it is quite surprising actually, because at first I thought like, oh my god, you're just gonna replace James Bond completely, and it's going to just suck. But Nomi, the character was kind of intriguing, and I felt like I wanted to know more about her story, like what's her approach to like personalities, and like how does she use her charm, because it was clear that she nearly seduced James Bond, but then who knows what happens, but she very much stays like in control of many situations, but at the same time I don't know much about her, and I didn't really learn her psyche, learn like what kind of character she was. She was not very much the center point there. Aside from her demanding the respect of a former 00 for the title that she earned. Yeah, I'll talk more. Actually, I still have tea. Yeah. No. It wasn't like that. It's it wasn't done like this. It's yes, perhaps like I would agree with that explanation in the first first two times perhaps of her saying like, okay, but I'm the 00 now. But then they moved to like they had to do some kind of a mission together, and James Bond was kind of reinstated as like a 00 agent, but they didn't say which number, and she kept badgering about like what number, what number does he have, which number, and it was clear that it was perhaps just a number and it wasn't that important, but she kept battering about it, which was quite strange. That's how it sounded to me, the way you explained it. Yeah, I understand, and I like that you bring up these points, by the way, Gautier. Even if you didn't see the movie, it's important to ask these for me to clarify. I think that makes the whole kind of review better as well, and it makes me think about what I'm saying as well. It's clear that she wanted to know if she had lost her 00 status. No. Then I explained it incorrectly. She knew that she had her 00 status still, and she still was 007 because she was referred to as 007 on several occasions before and after. But she wanted to know if James Bond is 007 now, as well as her. Essentially, that's what was happening there, you know. But I don't want to go into too much detail because I feel like this is already a tiny spoiler that I said. So maybe that's why I'm not expressing myself very clearly, because I don't want to spoil anything at all in the movie. I did put no spoilers in the bottom left there, so you know. I mean, you'll take your own opinion. It was just something that I felt like was maybe a bit overdone. The constant insistence on her being the 007 rather than James Bond felt more like a nod to our progressive audience than to anything else. And I must reiterate, I myself am progressive. Like I would describe myself definitely like on a cultural spectrum, progressive. Maybe not in the economical plan. I'm definitely not a commie. But overall, like culturally, socially, everything, I am progressive as well. It's just when it fucks up with the art, and the same thing can be said for conservatism, by the way. I hate movies that just dogmatically venerate God for just being, you know, or conservative values like family values for no other reason than just political propaganda. They are shit, but these movies are pretty much not made anymore, or not successful enough for me to have heard about them. These movies were very prevalent in the 50s and 60s. One of the reasons why I don't like old movies, or not many old movies, essentially. Either way, the movie had a generally good reception among critics. I think that was because of the progressive notes and stuff. But for me, it was nothing much, you know. I was relieved to see that they didn't completely tarnish and shit on the James Bond, essentially, movie legacy. And we can talk more about that movie legacy, because you could say that it is fraught with like misogyny as well, and mistreatment of women, definitely in 60s and 70s, and kind of supporting culture that very much would not be okay today. But I liked what Barbara Broccoli said at a Me Too, no, not at the Me Too, but at the Bond 25 launch event, where she stated that Bond's attitude towards women would move with the times, and the films should reflect that, essentially. He needs to stay true to his character. Instead suggesting that it was the films which had to grow and evolve. Something the important thing is that the film treats the women properly, and that's what I agree with a lot. What Barbara Broccoli said is that the films need to evolve, rather than James Bond needing to like be completely wiped off the face of the planet and destroyed. And I feel like the film did well in evolving while maintaining character of a James Bond movie, and that is, I feel, an important point to state. I was afraid that the James Bond character would just disappear and it would just suck. Now, but it doesn't. It still maintains a James Bond movie like kind of structure. It is still a James Bond film. If you remember, there were lots of conversation about Quantum Solace not really being a James Bond movie, because it was just like there was no charm to it. It was just James Bond being sad and killing people, and it was just like gritty and like nothing much. I kind of enjoyed Quantum of Solace, but I agree that it's very different from like what classic James Bond really is, and perhaps should be. But this movie did have charm, and it stayed true to like the James Bond kind of like essentially the way it's structured. I feel this is more of a James Bond movie than Quantum of Solace, but I enjoyed it less because of the shitty dialogue. So just to recap, the story structure, James Bond movie, and the movie evolving with the times, very well made. while maintaining James Bond character, very good, but the dialogues were shit, and the writing essentially of what the characters are saying is somewhat scuffed. But it really feels like someone, and that's why I kept bringing up this Waller-Bridge character. It really feels like she just fucked with the dialogues, because the story structure and the character development and where the characters kind of like get to overall, excluding the fact that I feel like I wanted to learn more about Nomi, for example, or about the character that you see here on the screen right now, that they were kind of underdeveloped, I felt like. Other than that, the story as a whole worked well. It was just the dialogues that killed it completely, and or the story like worked like on an average level. I felt like it made sense. I mean, it's worth seeing, you know. It's still a James Bond movie. That's the thing. It's still a James Bond movie. There are several things that I didn't like about it. It's an overall, I would just give it like underwhelming kind of status. I tend to, or lots of people tend to compare James Bond movies, I suppose, especially like Daniel, like within like the same actor. And when it comes to like, and now we can do that actually, because this is most likely going to be Daniel Craig's last James Bond, sorry. And I feel like, I mean, so what he has, right? Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, Spectre, and this one, No Time to Die. The most James Bond and the best written probably is still Casino Royale or Spectre. One of the two. After which you would probably have I don't know, this would be controversial, but okay, I would say Casino Royale, then Spectre, then Quantum of Solace, believe it or not, even though it's, as I said, not really James Bondy, but that's what I like. Not that it's not James Bondy, but I like the fact how it's made essentially. Then I would put Skyfall, and I think this one would go last, quite honestly, like worst of the Daniel Craig movies. But it wasn't terrible. Like the reason why I'm not like talking about it, like shitting on it too much, is because I expected much worse. I expected a travesty, essentially. And it wasn't a travesty. It was still okay. It's still worth a watch. I will definitely not ever watch it again. Most likely never watch it again. But it's worth the one watch. I would suggest. What would I suggest? I would suggest you don't. I don't know. It depends. There are some spoilers in this that I feel like they would ruin your experience as a viewer if you knew beforehand. At the same time, I wouldn't advise you to pay for it in cinemas if your cinemas are more expensive than any other possibilities of getting the movie, you know? So perhaps like look at video on demand when that would be available. Try to avoid too many messages about this movie. That's what I would suggest. I don't think it's worth if your cinemas are much more expensive than like getting the movie in other means, like it is in the Czech Republic, for example, because our cinemas are quite expensive to go to. I would wait because I don't think it's actually worth. But again, it depends on your overall idea or overall feeling towards James Bond.